Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we're recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to get to them answered online. We are particularly pleased to welcome a moderator, Tom Temin, the host of Federal Drive on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Let me turn over the reins to Tom to begin today's discussion.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guests today are Neil Wiley, the Deputy Director for Analysis at the Defense Intelligence Agency, Stephen Buckner, the Assistant Director for Communications at the Census Bureau, Gary Duno, the Director for Analysis at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and Dave Rost, the subject matter expert on insider threats at MarkLogic. Great to have you all with us for this panel. And, federal agencies are coming into the era of data, and they need to collect data, they need to store it, they also need to use it for mission support in a way I think that we have not seen until now. So why don't we start by getting a sense of what the scope and style and types of data that you hold, what they're used for, and some of the tools you're using now to get that data analysis done. Neil, we'll start with you.
No, thank you. So the Defense Intelligence Agency, our role in the IC, we're one of the all-source analytic agencies. So our job is to make sense of things using any available intelligence source that we have. So this is, as you might expect, very data intensive. The biggest change we've seen, I think, over the last 15 to 20 years is the volume and scope and breadth of that data. I think people will see that in their normal lives. The data and information available to the average individual is now far greater than it was 15 or 20 years ago. The same is true for the intelligence services. So against that context, our biggest challenge is to extract the most fulsome, useful, and comprehensive analysis we can now out of a large volume of very disparate data. So whether that's available, data available in the open source, in the open environment, or whether that's data collected by the various arms of the intelligence community, our job is to bring all of that together and to make sense out of it. And really, we look now very carefully at how we can extract the maximum utility from that data.
So it's probably safe to say that data that might come into the DIA was not necessarily gathered expressly for the purposes of the DIA in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we're an all-source intelligence agency, so we're avid consumers of data gathered, acquired throughout the IC, and then available in the open source. We, in fact, are source agnostic. That's part of the value of an all-source intelligence data. So we're not wedded or particularly focused on one particular source of data. Again, our job is to make the best assessment we can on all the available data that we have.
Okay, and Steve, at the Census Bureau, of course, you generate a lot of data that is used throughout the government and throughout the private sector, for that matter.
So the Census Bureau, we are the largest federal statistical agency in the U.S., and we do collect a lot of data. We measure America's people, its places, and its economy, and most people are familiar with the Census Bureau for the interactions they have with the once-a-decade census, which is a constitutional mandate, which we take very seriously. A little bit less familiar with some of the other programs that we do and the data that we collect around our economic census once every 5 years, a government census that we do once every 5 years, and then also more than 100 annual surveys. So we're out there a lot dealing with the American public, going house to house or through businesses. And some of the things that we're looking at from a data standpoint is some of the paradata coming from the surveys or the censuses and how we might be able to use that data to make more accurate estimates about the population and the economy and America's businesses. And also looking at how we change our business model when it comes to that type of data and the exchanges that we're having with our respondents. So is there an easier way to collect that information that historically has not been available to statistical data collection? We are moving more and more towards online data collection, and we're starting to look at other government data records that exist that we might be able to take without having to ask households that are very busy with their time or businesses that just don't have enough time to fill out some of the things. So we're trying to look at how do we ease the respondent burden by collecting data that's already out there, and then also trying to make more timely estimates. So the traditional survey model is, if we send something out to a business or a household, we wait for a response or get them to respond online. But are there other ways that we can collect the same type of data without having to go to the respondent? And so we're really looking at data from an intelligence standpoint of how do we make better estimates and more timely estimates. Part of what I'm going to be talking about today also is just how do we take the information that we're getting from our customers, the people that are using our data. So most people do realize we collect it, but we also in our mandate have to disseminate that information. So how do we get that information, which is free to the public and to the businesses, to help drive innovation out there? And so trying to understand the data that's coming in and analytics that are coming in from the web and social media and all the other communications channels that we have, how can we better anticipate the needs of the customer and deliver on the products and services that we may actually need to push out to the American public?
Plus, you have the element of time. I think the latest release of census, some of the data it was from 1940, and then another few years you'll do 1950. So a lot of it's got to be kept for basically a lifetime.
Yeah, so we have a lot of data, and our website is vast, over 5 million pages and assets across the website, and we're trying to transform that to make it more customer-centric to where people can find that information. But you're right, the decennial census has been going on since 1790. It's in the Constitution, but we also have a lot of other survey data that comes out annually that goes back a long ways as well. So for comparisons around longitudinal data, people have to be able to get to that, and we're trying to open that data up through APIs. We have a very robust API and over 3,000 keyed API developers that are taking that information to try to use it in applications they're developing to either drive their business model or create some kind of innovation around a product or service.
Well, one thing you can say, those enumerators from the 40s, they sure had good handwriting. Something lost in the mobile age.
And really nice hats, yes.
And really nice hats. Yeah. All right, Gary, I mean, your agency, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, could be called the National Geospatial Data Intelligence Agency, would probably fit right in there. And so tell us some of the challenges and also give us a sense of the scope of what you have.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So we've always had a challenge with data just because some of our responsibilities looking at imagery intelligence, and geospatial or mapping data requires us to look at large files, large volumes of files, and so big data has always been a challenge for us, and how we store that, how we access it, and how we use it. And so one of the challenges we've had over history is we've lagged a little bit behind in our processes as technology has evolved, and people who are executing the mission at a specific time have developed techniques and procedures that allowed them to use the data in their isolated stovepipe for their mission, but does not allow the data to be accessible or retrievable by others who might also want to use that data. And so as we're progressing and as technology is progressing through cloud capability, you can almost not sneeze without hearing cloud and big data today. And so we're trying to leverage those capabilities as we look at future investments on how we handle things like full motion video, which is very hard to store, but also very hard to look through and determine where patterns are happening within the video itself.
And I imagine, too, you have a time factor, like if you survey a certain zone on the Earth and maybe a week later fly over it or somehow take another look at it, something changes, but you may not want to preserve the entire database if you can only keep the changes, but the base layer in some manner stays the same. Is that one of the issues?
That is a challenge for us, and it's based on different mission needs. And so in some cases, we will keep data historically in perpetuity in order to be able to look back and see what trends might have happened at that specific location.
Like if a tree was across
time.
A field, maybe it wasn't really a tree.
Right. Yeah.
If it looks
great example.
Oak trees don't usually walk, I guess, or whatever.
Right.
All right. Hopefully. And Davis, tell us what you're seeing across government in terms of the total government view that you have.
Sure. So MarkLogic is the enterprise, not only SQL database or NoSQL database. We've been working in the federal government for about 10 years now. So we get a wide variety of projects and data management systems that we help manage and help curate the data. And one of the things that we're really finding is that there's a transition from relational databases to not only SQL database. And that's largely because the data has grown exponentially over time, and it's become so large and so vast in variety that users are having a difficult time keeping up with that. They're having a difficult time modeling that data and putting it in usable formats so that analysts and consumers of that data can look at it objectively and fuse that data together. We're seeing a lot of ownership of the data, or owners and creators of the data stovepiping that information into databases, and that becomes costly to an organization as they replicate the database over and over again for different types of data. And then users are not able to see into each of that database without looking not looking objectively across all the data sets.
All right. So so that some of the non-structured is really people have a need to bring that into what it is they're analyzing.
True.
But when you have a PDF or something, or even a spreadsheet, it just doesn't compute in the same way that data gathered for a specific purpose might have had.
Exactly. It's very easy for organizations to manage their structured data sets. There's stuff that fits in rows and columns pretty easily. But then organizations have this knowledge management that's in our humans' heads, right? It's in the analyst's head. It's in the contractor's head. It's in the contractor manager's or the program manager's head. And how do we get that information out of their heads and put it into an objective database? It's a very difficult challenge that organizations that are on this panel are facing right now.
Yeah, Neil, let me ask you that. The diversity data question, how does that affect you, and what is the range of diversity that you see and need to bring in and inculcate?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think that's the central challenge for big data now within our profession, is how you make the best use of a very broad and diverse data set. So one of the big challenges that we have is the way we used to do things. So historically, we collected and stored data in silos, essentially, based on what the collection source was and who acquired it. So we put one kind of data, we put geospatial data, so in one spot. We put some other types of data in another spot, another spot. So, and the analyst then would need to know what data or what information was available in what silo, and essentially manually research, compile, and organize this stuff, which was very manpower intensive in the old days when there wasn't a lot of data. But now there's an awful lot more data, and there's more and more of it every day. So actually, it's beyond the ability of humans to do. So what an analyst does under the existing business, and I say existing, it's really sort of the legacy business practice. It's not where we want to go, but it's what a lot of people are still doing. An analyst who has to do his or her business under a time-compressed schedule, because all analysis has a time relevance to it, will be familiar with a certain number of sources or a certain number of pieces of data which he or she knows is relevant to her problem or his or her problem. They'll go to it, they'll find it, they'll assemble it, they'll make the best assessment they can on it within the time frame they have, they kick it out the door, knowing full well that there is potentially lots and lots and lots of other data and information that is relevant to that problem that they just don't see, they can't get to, and they can't process.
So it's the problem of I don't know what I don't know.
It's a problem is I don't know what I don't know, and given the vast amount of information now available, chances are you don't know something you should know, and we're not structured now to make sense of it. And so in the business life of an analyst, what they spend most of their time doing is discovering, searching, and collating. They spend actually very little time comparatively thinking about what they see. So the goal is to break down those information and data stovepipes and silos that Gary was talking about, and to somehow bring them together in a way that data analytics can search, organize, see relations, patterns, and trends, and do a lot of that clerical and organizational work up front for the analyst to give that analyst more time to do what humans are very good at, which is sophisticated, complicated sense-making.
Figuring things out.
Right.
Gary, is that the case at NGA? I mean, you do most of your own data gathering and data creation, so do you have that? Is it mostly homogeneous and you're okay with the columns and rows, or do you have different types of data sets also?
No, it's we run the spectrum at NGA right now, as I think most intelligence agencies do, and we're working together right now on this concept called object-based production, which is allowing us to be able to structure our data in a way that will help, as Neil mentioned, analysts spend less time researching things about an object and conducting analysis on that object, and will allow us to create tools through automation that will give the analysts some answers to things that they may not even have been looking for in the first place. So as
just
we
describe a little bit more about what you mean by object-based production.
So-
what is an object?
So an object can be a person, it can be a place, it can be a thing, it can even be an activity. And but it's defined throughout the intelligence community so everyone understands exactly what you're talking about. So when you say a tank, everyone knows what a tank is. When you say a commander, everyone knows what a commander is. And then we ascribe attributes to each of those objects that any analyst, in an ideal state, any analyst could identify one of those attributes, apply it to the object, and then when anyone goes to look at that object, they have that attribution as well.
But that brings in some issues of taxonomy, which have to relate to the data, because if you said the word tank, you could be talking about a field of storage for petroleum, or you
Right.
could be talking about something that rolls and shoots things.
Right. So we're going through a lot of work right now, and we just stood up a team dedicated to our data standards and object ontologies to make sure that we're all speaking the same way. Or if we're not, we have the capability to translate between our different databases and services to be able to say the same thing at the same time.
So the whole dictionary idea and the whole understanding within the domain, and then there's even probably cross-domain issues. And we'll get into those in just a moment, but first we're going to take a short break. Our guests today are Neil Wiley, the Deputy Director for Analysis at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Stephen Buckner is the Assistant Director for Communications at the U.S. Census Bureau. Gary Duno is the Director of Analysis at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and Dave Rost, the subject matter expert on insider threats at MarkLogic. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, on Contextual Intelligence, Deciphering Disparate Data in Government, sponsored by MarkLogic on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.